There we go. Okay, so this evening we'll be talking about ketosis. That's a metabolic disease, or an illness more than a disease, really. It can affect dairy cows at various levels of severity. And it can cause not only sick cows, but also just uncomfortable cows and a lot of production loss, which is not always visible to the farmer. With ever developing sort of technology at hand, we are making this though more visible to our farmers, and that is one thing I will be talking about later, what our robots and our robot data you can use that you may know or may not actually be aware of yet. So hopefully that will be very useful to you guys. However, this evening I'll be also joined by Mike Steele, who works for Lely Atlantic. He is a vet there and has lectured at Bristol University and worked for a well-known pharmaceutical company where he's done lots of work to benefit dairy farmers, including treatments and prevention of ketosis. So Mike is the person to really talk you through what is ketosis, but mainly how does it impact on your farm. The perfect person, I would say so. Many of you will know me if you are joined with the Lely Center in Devon and Cornwall. I'm Wendy Ward, so I work as a vet there at the farm management side. So the FMS service, that is available to all our farmers to contact us, and we contact them to improve their herd performance and their robot performance. My other colleague, Maren Cowles, will hopefully be joining us at the end of this meeting. Maren has got a background in dairy nutrition, so she'll be able to answer more sort of nutrition type questions. So as I said here, this webinar will be recorded. There will be a chat option. So if you've got questions type of Zoom you've got, you will find a little speaking cloud which you can press, and then you can fill in questions for the chat. We will do an actual sort of live Q&A or questions and answers session at the end of this meeting, which will hopefully will be a nice sort of discussion. We'll start this evening with the economics of ketosis, transition period, dry period into the milking herd, and then I'll follow on with the robot software and detection of ketosis. We'll go through prevention and treatment options and new features in the new Lely software, the Horizon. But first of all, I'd like to give the word to Mike Steele. I can't see him at the moment, but I'm thinking he might be able to turn his video on just to say hello.
Yes, thank you, Wendy.
No, Ken, I'm trying to sort it out.
Yeah, I turned it off just because it was glitching a little bit, and I thought it might help if it was only just you with the video on, but that's fine. So my name's Mike Steele, and I also work for Lely. I work for the Lely Atlantic team in the headquarters, and I'm farm management services or support lead for the whole of the UK and Ireland, along with my aftercare team over in Birmingham. So as Wendy said, yes, I'm a vet. I've been working for 20 years in this as a vet, and I've been lucky enough to be in a job where I've worked in many countries across the globe. So I've seen dairies from Pakistan to Canada, from Uganda to Estonia. So I've picked up a few tricks on the way, and what I'd like to say is I'd just like to share some of that experience with you now. So hopefully you can all see my screen here. I'll put it on full screen just to make it a little easier. Lovely. So when we're talking about ketosis, the first thing I always like to talk about is where's the value? because if you can't see where the value is, then nothing will ever be done to change anything. So you've got to see where the value is going to come from. So if we talk of the farm as a factory unit, and we're making milk as the output, then what we need to do is reduce losses in the system, and ketosis is one of those losses. So ketosis affects the future milk supply. So if we can reduce ketosis, we'll have a better milk supply and a more consistent one. Ketosis affects reproduction, and our farm's not going to work in 9 to 18 months' time if we're not getting cows pregnant. So certainly ketosis is a key player of reducing efficiencies in reproduction. We want less disease. Ketosis is linked to endometritis and metritis. We don't want any of that. So ketosis is certainly linked to that. And we want to maximize the feed efficiency. So we want to make sure that we're feeding the cow the right amount to minimize that energy balance gap that they have. But ultimately, what we're really talking about is preparing for the lactation. And one of my friends that now works in the University of South Africa, I'll never forget his words, because he always started his talks on this subject with, "A cow begins milking when you dry her off," which sounds like initially like it doesn't make sense, but when you start to look at where ketosis comes from, it's exactly right. So what we need to look at when we're looking at transition diseases like ketosis is, I never blame people for a problem. I blame parts of the process. And if we start to understand the process, then we can start to look at what to change. And with transition, I think one of the main challenges we have is the amount to manage in that period of time. And if I workshop this for a whole afternoon, which I've done sometimes, I get people to fill in on post-it notes on a timeline like this. All the different things you do for nutrition, for monitoring, for managing cows, for feeding, all of the things over that 90-day period from minus 60 days to plus 30 days after calving. But for the sake of time here, you can look at a whole bunch of stuff that we do when we dry cows off. Then when it comes to close-up, we're looking at changing things again and tweaking things, modifying things. Calving is a huge stress on the animal, especially if it's for the first time. So there's going to be lots of changes happening to the cow. She's going from dry to milking. She's going from pregnant to non-pregnant. She's going through social group changes. She's going through feed changes, and her rumen is going to make a huge amount of change in that time. And then as we go towards the 30 days in milk, this is where she's actually now genetically programmed to give a lot of milk. So there's nothing we can do about that. We've bred her to do that. So energy balance deficit is inevitable. It's going to happen. What we do, in fact, it's a natural part of the process of calving. But what we can do is minimize it. So our job isn't to prevent it, it's actually just to minimize it. So what are we doing when we're preparing for lactation? Well, there's several things we want to do, and that's prepare the udder for a high and clean milk production in the next lactation. We want to reduce the disease risks, and there are 6 main diseases. That's mastitis, retained placenta, metritis, displaced abomasum, ketosis, and the extra metabolic thing that's not really related to energy is milk fever. That's more to do with calcium. We don't want her to gain too much weight in the dry period, because if she does that, then she's going to lose weight quickly after calving. So we want to fill her up, but provide her with a low energy diet. And we want to lower as many stresses we can as possible on the cow. So some of those are social, like bullying, but also physical stresses like heat stress and movement stresses, diet stresses, lots of other things that are going to change that cow's experience through transition. So when we're talking about energy, one of the first things to look at is, what are we talking regarding energy? How much energy do we need? And when you look at a glass of milk, it's 87% water, and then it's 4.9% lactose, 3.9% fat, 3.1% protein, roughly, depending on what your fat and protein levels are, and some traces of calcium and vitamins. What does that really mean in terms of the cow? And if you imagine this, it's the lactose part that requires most of that energy. The fat also requires a large amount of energy, but lactose, just to put it into perspective, 4.9% lactose is 49 grams a litre. So in a 40-litre cow, that's nearly 2 kilos of pure sugar that the udder has to produce. That's produced in the udder. It's not produced from the liver. In fact, the liver has to make twice that amount of energy because the liver provides the udder with glucose, and lactose is 2 glucoses stuck together. So the liver has to make twice the amount of glucose for the udder to make 1 lactose. So that's in terms of energy demand. That's 2 kilos of pure lactose every day. So what happens over the dry period as far as dry matter intake goes? And we know that as cows get closer to calving, then their dry matter intake goes down. Heifers still go down, but they start from a lower level. And what happens as a result of that? Well, cows will overconsume energy relative to their requirements. So if you give them the chance, they will eat as much as they can. And this red line is if they are allowed ad lib diet through the dry period. But what happens as a result of that is they get a huge drop of energy requirement around calving. And then their lactation curve never picks up for the whole lactation curve. So that's always roughly 3 to 5 litres less across the 305 days. So if you restrict their energy and their dry matter intake over the dry period, and you keep that consistent, then their milk, actually, their dry matter intake goes up in a nice level, and their milk absolutely mirrors this graph. So although this says dry matter intake, if you had different, in fact, this is literage on the left here, if you had their milk yield, it is exactly the same. So you start restricted, and restricted diets have higher milk over the rest of the lactation curve. So this is just to say that the length of the dry period as well, this grey line is if you have no dry period at all, which is not recommended, but you don't get any metabolic disease. There's no energy. There's no energy deficit. However, you don't get very much milk over the lactation curve, which is why people give a dry period. So if you do a dry period for 28 days or 56 days, the energy balance drops pretty much the same. It doesn't make any difference. So the dry period is always going to have that energy balance drop. So I've said before that ketosis is related to all of these other transition diseases. Ketosis is subclinical if you don't see it, or it can be clinical when you do see it. So ketosis is related to nutrition. Displaced abomasum, absolutely related to ketosis. Animals with ketosis are 8 times more likely to get displaced abomasum. Milk fever, as I said, is unrelated to energy. That one's related to calcium management. Mastitis, more to immune stresses, but also nutrition. Metritis, totally related to ketosis. They're actually 2.6 times more likely to get metritis if they have ketosis. And retained placenta is, again, 2.8 times more likely. When we really look at the cause of the diseases, it's about limiting system variability. If we keep things consistent with cows, then the rumen's going to be consistent and the cows have less diet stresses and less group stresses. So if we try and keep everything the same, we're going to maximize output in lactation. What about the consequence? Well, if you've got ketosis on the farm, then you've got more labor to fix sick cows. You get less milk during the disease, and that never picks up over the 305-day lactation. There's treatment costs, reproductive losses, because there's increased time to pregnancy and a decreased first service conception risk. And the reason why is because of the egg quality. So it's not just the cycling of the cow. If they have ketosis, they're more likely to have anestrus and not cycle. But even if they have estrus cycles, the egg quality and the covering around the egg to protect it as it goes down the fallopian tube, we know is damaged in ketosis. So they're less likely to conceive and less likely to produce a live embryo at the end of it. And you have replacement losses. So certainly if they get to clinical ketosis or displaced abomasum, then you've got involuntary culling losses, and those losses are huge when it comes to economic loss. Is it common? The answer is absolutely yes. There was an audit done in 2014 by Anna Berger and Kiet Vertenten, and these two looked at ketosis across Europe. And you've got the figures here. So the UK is pretty much average at 30. Germany was a little bit higher, and one of the highest was actually the Netherlands. Again, if prevalence of ketosis goes up, the prevalence of all of the related diseases goes up as well. We've talked about the consequences. So costing, you can split the costs into direct costs, which are those that that come directly out of your pocket. So this would be treatment and labor, and indirect costs are the ones that you don't notice, but they certainly happen, and they're actually the higher costs. So this is future milk loss, culling loss, replacement loss, and reproductive loss. And when you're talking about costing, sometimes you see in the press different numbers attributable to ketosis. And if you are interested in that kind of subject, and I'm a little bit of a nerd in that respect, you have to make sure that people don't double count. So if people have the costs of, say, a displaced abomasum, and they're costing that with ketosis, you can't add the two together, because cows don't die twice. There's a culling loss related to ketosis, and there's a culling loss related to displaced abomasum. So the current correct economic model, if you put everything together, is it costs around about €257 a case, or that's roughly at the moment 220 GB pounds a case. What can you do to treat it? Well, the answer is, when you see it, it's kind of too late, but you can treat it with propylene glycol. That is an option. But when we do treat it with propylene glycol, then it tends to be as a veterinary treatment. So you give it in the lactating period when you see it, and you have to give it over several days and several times a day. If you're trying to prevent it, the problem there is when people put top dresses on, or it's a diet supplement, then the whole reason you get ketosis is because of a lack of dry matter intake over calving. So the problem there is that cows don't actually ingest the propylene glycol that you're top dressing. And at this, I could give you a ketosis experience of a farm that I've been on, but I don't think we have time to do that. All I would like to do is show you a little bit of some of the risks here, which are fat cows. And I'd like to show you as well a little bit of a video, just quickly, of what I saw in the late lactation diet. These cows are not enthusiastically eating. They're actually picking the food that they want. That straw isn't going into them. So the diet on paper is not matching the diet the cow is ingesting, and she's not getting the fiber that she needs. This is the dry diet. Once again, that cow is totally lifting what she can because the straw is too long. So the fiber in the ration is not matching that the cow is taking in. Hence, they were getting very, very fat and getting ketosis. So adjusting the chop length of the straw fixed ketosis on this farm. So with that, I'll answer some of your questions later, but I will hand you over back to Wendy. Wendy's there. There we go.
Hello.
Sure, yeah. She's just coming back. There we go. Lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Mike, for that. Very good to sort of just get a bit of a recap. Ketosis is like an energy deficiency disease that most of us will kind of know about. And very good of you to say that, yes, you got your clinical cases, but you're too late at that point. Even the clinical and the non-clinical case, you got lots of other diseases they can get with ketosis. Bit of chicken and egg, who comes first? But the main thing is like a lower milk yield for the rest of the lactation, and your poorer egg quality and reproduction is a big thing, which later on can lead to higher culling rates, which will be the biggest cost, really. Now, my bit is most of these guys are involved with, obviously, robots. So I'm going to share my screen again. Yep. There we go. So when Mike sort of told us what ketosis implications there are on farm, with the robots, you got a lot of information, and it's up to us to sort of find out how to use that information to the best benefit. And a lot of times I've heard from farmers, we get so much bulk information that it's not that easy sometimes to find out what is actually useful, and when do I look at it, and how do I make a decision for that cow or for my herd in the future, because we want to prevent ketosis. First of all, I'm going to just talk to you probably what you sort of will see already. So the signs of ketosis. So the straightforward sort of signs. Okay, we got an off-color cow, lower in milkings on your milk report. That will mean that she'll be on your collect cow list. So that will be a cow you're going to fetch anyway. She'll also have a drop in milk yield and low activity and lower rumination as well, because she's a bit poorly. She's not eating enough, won't ruminate enough. That comes together with obviously the lower eating minutes. And then the other one, which is a typical one we're looking at for ketosis in itself, it's a high fat and protein ratio. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. If you've got your Lely robots at the moment, you've got T4C as your software program, and a couple of you are trying out the new program, which will be Horizon, which is available for everyone to try now. What reports or graphs are you looking at to find these things? Now, that's quite a few. So you can look at your collect cow list for lower milkings and your visit behavior reports. You will see the drop in milk yield in your visit behavior as well, but clearly also your daily production and your daily production graphs. If you go actually into those cows that are top of the list, so your most worrying cows. You go into a cow cart, you can also see the activity graph of a cow. And I bet that most farmers will say, yes, I've seen that one day. I looked at the activity graph, and actually 3 days before my cow was ill, she had a lower rumination already. That seems to be the first thing that stops, or drops, should I say. So that's a really important one, really. There you go, your total rumination minutes. And again, your activity graph, that's all in your activity graph, your eating minutes, your activity, and your rumination. The bottom one, the fat and protein ratios, you can find in your daily production report. So that is one that shows you cow milk yield. What it shows you there on T4C is a fat and protein ratio indication or remark. And it will actually say already to you inversion, which would be the other way around, kind of like a low fat, or ketosis, which really means a high butter fat compared to a medium or lower protein. So that ratio is out of sync. However, 1 or 2 years ago, Lely decided to come up with a bit of a brainwave and said, well, we've got these sort of 10 reports and graphs there all together. Why don't we put all this information and filter out the cows that a farmer really needs to look at? So the most important report for your day-to-day use is your report 10, your health report. If a cow has got 1 or 2 more things wrong with her on the data, she'll be on that report, and that cow should be checked. So that's probably the way you find your cow, the health report, and then you click on the cow, and then you look at your activity graph, your rumination graph, and make up your mind, and obviously look at the cow yourself as well. So how does that look? This is your activity graph. There you go. You got your rumination in blue, and then another blue there. Depending on what kind of colors you've got eating minutes as well. So that's the transponders on the next. There's different versions on them, and some people will or won't have the eating minutes on there. But you can see there, for example, this cow dropping there in daily production, milk yield, and in rumination. Something's going on with this cow there. Now what you do then, you can set up your treatment plans. And ideally you do that with your vet. It doesn't have to be exactly for that cow or that point, obviously you do that then. But also overall in your health plans, you make up a treatment plan. If I got a cow with ketosis, I do this. Mike mentioned I treat her with propylene glycol, same sort of ketol. That could be your treatment plan. You can set this up into your TD, so it pops up in your medicine book. But also other things. I mean, we've probably learned about sort of ketosis prevention with boluses in the dry period. That could be an option as well. If you think, well, actually this cow might not have ketosis, I'm going to suspect her of ketosis. And that will be your cows that Mike mentions, these fat cows, twin cows with double calves, twin calves in them might be at risk of developing ketosis because of their individual sort of circumstances. So you might want to give them a bolus of a certain product. You can do that. You can also always fill in your specific treatment for this particular cow, the fill in yourself option. If you want to extend the treatment, and I'm just putting this there because not everybody realizes that, you open your treatment for the cow again. Say you execute that same treatment, but you click on that treatment that is already on the go, you add a plus button, and then you add another couple of days. And in that way, you don't get a cow being treated twice for ketosis or another disease, but you just extend the treatment she's on. And that just makes the figures in your medicine book make more sense. That's just a bit of a tip. Now that was the one cow. Now if we slowly go away from the one cow and get a bit of an overview of the herd. If we got a current herd problem, you can actually have a graph of the total rumination minutes of the whole herd, each cow that day. There we go. So the fresh cows here, oh, there's a bit of a difference in rumination there. So these are 600 minutes a day, depending a bit on what diet they are on, and maybe what neck tag you're using as well. There's a slight difference between the two different tags. But yeah, you can see here at the risk period, here there's a couple of cows ruminating really poorly compared to the rest of the herd that are probably on the same diet, same stage of lactation. Going back to the fat protein, what I mentioned. So ketosis in its gold standard, if you like, is measured by BHB in the blood. So using things like a keto test with a blood stick on farm is very useful. That sort of picks up about 96% of cases, so that's very sensitive. The milk fat protein ratio is also less invasive, so it's very easy to use because we measure milk fat and milk protein every milking. So that's easy to use, it can be right there. The only thing is, it's an indication. So if you're looking into sort of research, and people have heard about it a lot now with all the COVID going on, the sensitivity of this test is about 60%. So that means that it sort of misses out 40% of cases of ketosis, and of the cases you get identified on that long list, the daily production list, some of them will not actually have ketosis, let's put it that way. So it's an aid. So but that aid will improve when you start to include other signs, like your activity and your rumination. At the moment, T4C doesn't do that. It just uses fat and protein. Yes, on the health report, it looks at the whole cow. But when it gives the ketosis indication, it's simply fat and protein, fat minus protein. That's what it is. The horizon, which we'll talk about later, goes a step further. Now, newer computer programs are basically more intelligent, so it does take more things into account. And actually always works like your own brain a bit more, like, well, that cow's got high fat protein ratio. Oh, she doesn't ruminate very well. She's early lactation, not late lactation. It comes up with an idea like that is one that is most likely to have ketosis. In both programs, you can get this same sort of scatter graph. So on this herd, this is where the fat protein ratios are for these cows. So there we go. You saw there was a couple of cows in this stage of lactation not ruminating very well. You see also, quite interestingly, there's a couple of cows with very high fat protein ratios. There's also at the end of lactation, but it's quite common. You just get sort of less diluted milk, if you like. So we're focusing on this end. There you go. And as a sort of rule of thumb, if you use fat protein ratios, if more than 10% of your fresh cows have a high fat protein ratio above 1.5, that indicates a negative energy balance, and then we've just got a bit of a herd issue there going on. Now this is a graph, and I think Michael wants to tip on a pin on this one. Another scatter graph, they all look similar, but this is the one that actually looks at your day production. And it's quite a nice one for you guys anyway to look at occasionally. So you see here all your cows and what stage of lactation they're in and what their yields are. So there is a big difference here in, let's say, no, there is a cow, let's say day 20, forget about the first 1 or 2 days, but we got a cow doing 15 kilos and we got a cow doing 56 kilos of milk a day. So I'm going to let Mike to do a little chat about this because he loves this graph.
I do indeed. This is, I think, the go-to graph that I look at before I go to any dairy before I visit. So whether you've got T4C, Horizon, Uniform, NMR, DC305, whatever software you're doing, you'll get this simple graph of yield versus days in milk. And each one of these dots, as Wendy said, is one cow. And what you can see in a year-round calving herd is a nice lactation curve. But what you'll also see is a range, as Wendy said. There are some cows here at the top that are achieving at peak milk at 60 to 80 days in milk. They're achieving 50, 55 litres quite easily. Now, that's your genetic potential. Now, I'm pretty sure if I walk on your farm, the genetic difference between your top and bottom cow isn't going to be that different. You go through all those catalogues and you choose the semen straws, and you're going to choose a cow that's kind of suited to your system. So that's your genetic potential, which means that all of those cows below those top cows are not reaching that potential for some reason. Now, that could be anything. It could be transition, it could be young stock management, it could be feed access, anything at all, heat stress, anything. But what I tend to look at is the range. So from the top cow is 55 here to the bottom cow, if we look at 60 days in milk, so these are the same cows in the same barn under the same system, that bottom cow's on 20 litres. And most cows are within that 50 to 25 range. Now that means that there's a 25 litre difference between the top and bottom cows, which means you're pretty inefficient. Because if we take a middle average line through that lactation curve, that's pretty much what you're going to target your ration on. And every cow that's above that middle line is giving you very profitable milk. Because if you're targeting your ration at, say, 30, 35 litres, and a cow gives you 36, that extra litre, okay, the 35 litres has cost you the amount that the food has cost to give 35 litres. So your milk income is 35 litres times your milk price minus the amount of costing of that food. Now that's growth, maintenance, and pregnancy all put in there. But any cow giving over 35, because growth, maintenance, and pregnancy is already accounted for, you only need the energy for that extra litre of milk. Now, the energy to produce a litre of milk is around 0.705 megacal, which in terms of feed cost for dry matter is around about 8 or 9 pence a litre. Whereas that stuff at 35 litres, that income over feed cost is actually closer to 21. So if your milk price is 30, all the cows that are on that average line and giving 35 litres have given you a profit of 9 pence. That's 30 take away 21. But that litre extra has only cost you 8 pence. So for 30 pence a litre, you're now getting 22 pence of profit out of that extra litre. And that's marginal milk. That's what pays for you to go to Tesco's, pay for your clothes, pay for your holidays, all of that. That income over feed cost profit simply pays for your cows. That's it. So we need to get as many cows in as narrow band as possible, so we're not losing profit below that midline. So if I see a wide range before 100 days in milk, like a over 12 kilo difference range, less than 100 days in milk, I think there's a transition problem on that farm. If it's got a tight range there and it widens in the right hand side of that lactation curve, I'm thinking there's a problem in the milking barn. If it's all the way across, it's either in the transition and the milking barn, or it's so bad in transition they can't catch up. So this tells me an awful lot about management of the herd, just looking at this one graph. I hope I got my point across, but you can ask questions at the end. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Wendy.
No, good. That's very good, and it is shown. I was going to sort of add here, just to make sure, because some people are going to ask that in a moment. Anyway, they're saying, what about my heifers? Because this graph, if you go to graph 43, you get the whole herd. So it could potentially be that those animals doing sort of, let's say you're 20 kilos, could for the majority be heifers, for example. So if you want to kind of filter them out, you can do that, because there is another graph hidden in your reproduction reports. It's not necessarily the first one you think of, but yeah, if you're going to your reproduction reports and you go to your cow actual stages, which is your sort of like your braid chart, you can actually filter that and take the heifers out of there, and then you can actually see the same curve, but then without the heifers. But I must say, on this farm again, you still see as the bottom 3 red dots, you do get, it's actually cows doing underperforming as well there. So now the next one, and I think this is especially if you're sort of like a farm advisor, this is the one you sort of look at sort of a couple of times a year. This is your cow lactation curve. Again, you can select that on heifers or cows in your settings, and it's really good. It gives you a nice overview. What you do need to realize, this takes all the data from a rolling 365 days. So it's not necessarily what happened today or yesterday. We're now moved from your ill cow and your problem that is happening now to further away, like, is this a farm that has always a problem that we need to address? So what you're looking at, if you're looking at ketosis, is like, yes, you've got your day production, your monthly lactation curve going up. What day does that peak? Yes, and then you got below that, the other red line is sort of what feed they're allocated. So it's always interesting to see if there's any lumps or bumps in there, the feed curve. And then we got the one we probably all think about when we think about ketosis, is the weight graph. So that's kind of comparing to body condition score. So we say here, body condition score is sort of like a 50 kilo gain or drop. So what we're looking here is at that green line from calving to when they do have their lowest weight, if you like. We don't want more than 50 kilos there. And we do want to gain weight, especially at that time when we start serving cows again. So day sort of 50, 60, we want them in a positive energy balance. There we go. You can see also, going back to the fat protein, you can see fat protein there as well, but it's more difficult to actually say something about that, if I'm really honest, in this graph. Now, when we go further, this is the little bit that T4C does. It's just to make this complete. So you do have an Analyze Your Health Treatments report, and it does show lots of things like foot treatments, mastitis treatments, and then we come to what we're talking about today is metabolic diseases. So we do have a bit of an idea if they occur on the farm, but to be fair, it's taken retained cleansings, maybe not, but milk fever and ketosis are both metabolic diseases, so they're counted together, and we cannot split them up in this report at the moment, I'm afraid. So there's a bit of a limited value information I put there. You can get all the detailed information, of course, out of the medicine book. And in the Lely software that's called Health Medicine Use, you get your whole list of treatments, and then you can count them up. Now this comes back to another thing, the propylene glycol Mike was talking about. So we can use it as a treatment for ketosis. And I remember giving little cans out and people having to drench the cows with sort of 500 ml of ketol one day and 250 the next, I think it was. It can also be used to manage ketosis. Now, so there is always the question, do I just improve my diet anyway? Or do I put this thing on, might call it a top dressing? Not so easy in the dry periods, because we really want to cover that whole period. What we can do, and that's just useful to know, is we can do things in the robots in early lactation. So there is an option to top dress the cake with a liquid feed in the robot as the cow enters. Any liquid can go through there, because I must say, straightforward propylene glycol is not that appetizing, so it can actually put cows off going to the robot. But there's lots of different products on the market nowadays that are tastier, really. What you use for that is a titanium liquid feeder, and because there are various products on the market, there's also various dose ranges on the market. So talk to your feed sort of person about that. The main risk period, though, is that first sort of 3 weeks in lactation. We're talking about that negative energy balance week, when they start cycling and everything else. Another thing people might want to know about, is very underused in my experience, is the reminders report. So you can put that report to your favorite reports, and then you can see little brackets and see how many reminders have I got for today. What you can do with a reminder is, let's say you're PDing a cow and that cow's got twins. So you could decide, hang on a minute, I need to treat this cow differently. I want to dry her off earlier. I want to give her a bolus before calving. I want to do X, Y, Z with her, because I don't want her to go ill with either ketosis or retained cleansings or all the other things they're more likely to get. You can put a reminder in your T4C or your Horizon that comes on that reminders report when that date is due to do that. You can use it for vaccines, for all sorts. So there's just a thing. It's very underused, let's put it that way. Now, coming to the actual new thing. So, Lely Horizon. So the new software program has got 3 advices. One is a keep open advice that deals with sort of advice on keep cows, don't serve them, so barren cows. So the cow has been served 6 times or is really underperforming for whatever reasons. That could be an advice coming up from the computer who analyze all the data. We have a ketosis advice, which obviously we're talking about tonight. We got a failure reduction advice, which is aims at less failed milkings, and they all are developed, and more will come. Focusing on the ketosis advice, there we go. We talked about the fat protein ratio that T4C uses. The Horizon is going to use a sick chance. So it's going to use the lower milk production, the rumination figures. Is the cow in early lactation, so 5 to 60 days, and she's got no other disease as well. That's another thing, because mastitis or cell count could give them a lower milk production and a lower rumination as well. So if she's got no mastitis, but she's got all the others, it comes up with this cow could have ketosis, and this is an intelligent computer program, so it will learn all the time. When you're trialing Horizon, or when you've got this on the farm, here's where you find your little list of cows with advisors. You can have different widgets on here as well. Everybody can make their own front screen, basically, your own dashboard to your liking. If you click on any of the ketosis advices, so the advice comes to Henny, 7 to 24 might have ketosis. She shows mild symptoms. And so there we go. She's 6 days. She's, well, 6th lactation, and she's 121 days into lactation. So she's a bit later on into lactation, really. But so that's a mild ketosis there. So that it could come up with a treatment plan that is already suggested that you put in there with your vet. And then you can either disagree or you can apply the action. So it's up to you then to make your decision. But it makes everything a lot easier and it puts those cows to the forefront. Another thing I found on Horizon is a transition report, a standard report. In your sort of reports button there, open it up and you get all your cows and you see, this was a demo farm, so there might be a couple of sort of figures there. But you see your cows' days in lactation, day production, and their 6 chances. So that is a nice report to just have a look. And even if you're a consultant or so on the farm, open that report and see what percentage of cows is concerning. There we go. Questions and answers. So now I need to unmute. If anyone wants to ask a question, please do so. Unmute yourself. And we'd like to have a nice discussion, really. Just checking.
Don't be shy. Any time you've ever been thinking, oh, I wish I'd always ask that question. Now's the time.
Yeah, I've got a question if you can hear me okay.
Yes, can indeed.
Just the monopropylene guide, got a couple of questions. I think you mentioned 100 to 500 mils in the first 21 days. I thought 500 might be quite a lot, but is that what you recommend, would it?
Well, it depends. There's obviously, I said, there's a lot of different products, and to be fair, the 500 mil comes really from the treatment point of view, really. So I think that the 100 mil is more what tends to be, let's say, the top dressing, the prevention or management type of sort of dose level, and then the 500 mil is really for your sick cows. That will be the top level, really. Yeah. Okay. But I have seen, Robin, it's different type of products that are probably not straightforward propylene glycol that seem to be dosed at higher rates. So yeah.
Okay. And for 21 days, or would you possibly, for the standard prevention of ketosis, would you 21 days, or I see some robots with 30 and 60 days.
Yeah, but
that's being fed.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Mike, what do you think? Well, from what I can find, and it's really let's say the research has all been done more or less on the 21 days than actually going beyond that much, really.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yes, yeah. So beyond 21 days, the risk of ketosis is pretty low. Most ketosis happens within 3 to 14 days. Up to 21, you're being safe. Beyond then, really, if you're seeing sick cows, I'd be looking somewhere else for ketosis.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. In fact, the one that takes me back to the slide that Wendy showed there with the ketosis advice on that cow that was fat to protein ratio 1.37. She was 100 and something days dazing in milk. So obviously ketosis is pretty unlikely up there. Some of those cows, if it's set to a threshold to go above 100 days, some of those cows, certainly in later lactation, they have quite high fat to protein ratios. In fact, yeah, you can have a fat to protein ratio of 2.5 or 3, but that's more down to a lack of lactose. So lactose gets less as they go through their lactation curve because of the lack of BST. So the relative amount of fat in the milk goes up later on in lactation. So if that ketosis advice is set to a threshold, too far down lactation, you're going to get false positives down that end.
I certainly agree with you, Mike. I see that on pretty much all farms we go to, and we look at that scatter graph on milk fat protein, that after 150, maybe 200 days, you do get a bigger proportion of cows just with higher fat protein ratios. That just seems to be normal, really. Yeah. I've got a question from from someone who says, I think they're talking about propylene glycol again as MPG. With MPG becoming so expensive, at what price does it become uneconomic? And I do know in the last couple of months, a couple of farms that were feeding liquid feeds have sort of stopped doing that, basically on economic reasons, for economic reasons.
Yeah, that's it. That is a good question, because when you price it out, certainly if you're giving it above 21 days, I think you need to think very hard about doing that now. You're right, with it being so expensive. Especially to every cow as well. Really, your ketosis risk cows, you can think of the word soft. So sick, old, fat, bearing twins. So soft cows, they're your ketosis risk cows. And it's not really about exactly about body condition score before calving. Although if body condition score is above 3.5, then on a 5 scale, that is 3.5, then they are more likely to get ketosis. But it's more about the rate of drop of weight from calving to peak lactation. So if in the first 50 days, if they drop over 50 kilos, which is half a body condition score, then they're far more likely to get ketosis. It's more about body condition loss after calving than it is about body condition score before calving.
So that would mean you're really looking at keeping up intakes more than anything else, or I mean, I'm thinking this is very, very valid question, because we have come the last couple of years with that option to feed liquids now, but they have become so expensive. What is the best prevention methods really to prevent ketosis?
Yeah, so the best prevention method is really get that transition diet right, with plenty of fiber and low energy, and keep it consistent from -60 to day 0. And then when they're in the milking barn, you saw that dry matter intake graph. If they're restricted in the dry period, their dry matter intake is far higher in the early lactation period. So you'll prevent it by doing that.
So surely quite a lot will be involved in late lactation management and drying off in the right condition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's even more prevention. That's fantastic. Yeah.
And the use of choline, possibly. Any thoughts on use of choline to help liver metabolism?
There have been reports there. I've seen plenty of research on choline by the companies that sell choline. But I do think it helps. There is a certain amount of evidence to show that choline does help, yes. Help to a certain extent to reduce your overall ketosis prevalence in a herd is debatable, but when you look at individual cows and prevention on a smaller scale, then choline does make sense. Yeah. Good questions so far. I'm enjoying this.
Okay, anyone else got any particular question on how to, on the actual transition of cows?
Bienvenidos a los Españoles, sí. I see that from the text.
Okay. I don't speak Spanish. Sorry. What dry matter intakes should your close-up dry cows be eating?
Good question. Good question. Yep. So that was on the graph that I had there. So the dry matter intake for cows is around 2 kilos dry matter. Sorry?
I'll stop sharing. You can share actually your screen again.
Yeah, sure. I'll go back back into Zoom, share screen. Oh, you always have to press share. That's it. There we go. Yes. So this graph here comes from Grummer, which is the kind of seminal work on dry cows and dry matter intake over the dry period. And this indicates 2 for cows and around 1.75 for heifers. And if I go on to the next one.
That's not 2 kilos, is it? That's...
No. This is this one's, in fact, yeah, this is where I was going next, actually. So this is dry matter intake because it's this is Tim Overton's paper, and because it's American, it's in pounds, so you have to divide everything by 2.2. So where we are here is on 16. So divide that by 2.2, you're on around about 7.8. 7.8 kilos. And diets there, yeah, here we are. Energy balance wise, 1.5 megacal. I know I'm using megacal. There are conversions. It's just because I'm used to that because I used to work for an American company. But look on any currency conversion type calculator on the net. 1.35 to 1.5 megacal is what you're looking for in terms of kilojoules. Like I say, you know, look up on a converter there. It's hard when you're doing these talks to a European audience because every country has a different way of looking at energy. The US have megacal, we have megajoules, and then Netherlands use relative grams of barley, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then France has a similar one, but relative to 100 grams of barley, something like that.
But in principle, it sort of, it comes to the same. You're giving them slightly, we can call it their restricted diet compared to an ad-lib diet, but obviously enough sort of dry matter intakes to get them to get an increase in intakes when they get to calving, really.
That's right. That's right.
Anyone else want to add anything in the chat as well?
What would be affecting cows coming into milk after calving with not so much milk as they should have? Okay, so this question's come in. What would be affecting cows coming into milk after calving with not as much milk as they should have? So this is lower than predicted yield. Yeah. So not enough protein in the late dry period? I don't think so. No. Where I would go in most of these animals where they're not reaching their yield potential, I would certainly look at ketosis as one of the biggest contributors to that. So I would be wanting to look at beta hydroxybutyrate levels in the blood, which your vet can do. If you're having a regular reproductive visit every 2 weeks or so, then what you could do is add those cows that have calved in the last 2 weeks onto that reproductive visit so that they can take a blood sample and send it off for beta hydroxybutyrate. And you can monitor them that way. So I would say ketosis would be my number one for not reaching yield potential. So that's not enough. It's not exactly not enough protein. It's actually not enough fiber. Would ketosis have a direct impact on milk quality? That's interesting. Okay, so milk quality, Chris, you asked this one. I'm going to ask you what you mean by milk quality. Are we talking milk solids or cell count, or both?
Just unmute.
Solids, lovely, thank you. Okay, because the relationship between ketosis and cell counts, there isn't one. Okay, but in solids, absolutely. So ketosis raises milk fats. Okay, there's no effect on the protein. But what happens is, because you get higher beta hydroxybutyrate, it increases butyrate into the udder, which normally milk fats, the contribution of butyrate from the blood to milk fats from the udder is around about 8%. But if you increase butyrate from the blood, you're going to get more of those fats coming out of the udder, but they're the wrong type of fats. Okay, so don't think, when people fix ketosis, they quite often see milk fat come down, and they'll say, you know what, I wanted milk fat. But what they actually don't realize is that they're restricting their volume as well. And their milk yield, their fat yield overall is worse than it should be, because milk yield is affected so much. So in fact, yes, when you do see high butyrates in early lactation, or high milk fats in early lactation, I would think of ketosis, but you're actually restricting your overall fat yield that way. I hope that answers the question.
One fat is not the other fat, basically, different types of fats.
Yeah. So those other 92% of fats, they come from another source. They come from the volatile fatty acids, and they come from, I've got a video on YouTube. You can go watch it. Just look at my name down there. Have a look on YouTube. I've got a video on milk fat depression in cows. Good question, though. I like it.
I'm just trying to find your video now.
Yeah, it's not a Lely one. It was made before I worked for Lely, I'm afraid. But it's just me chatting in my living room because it was pure lockdown stuff. I was trying to find something to do in COVID times early last year.
Okay, there's a couple of different ones on there, so I don't know yet. Otherwise, I would have sent everybody the link now.
Yeah, I do have one on ketosis as well. That's on there too.
Okay, anyone, any other questions?
Oh, here's one. Is the use of glycols beneficial on first lactation heifers? If they're at risk of ketosis, it will help. Yeah. Again, up to 21 days in milk, because other than that, ketosis is going to be less likely. But yeah, absolutely, just as effective as in older cows. Yeah. Muchas gracias, Manuel. Obrigado.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to just share my last little screen just to say thank you to for everyone for attending, and thanks for Mike Steele for joining us tonight and explaining a few things about ketosis and the management of it. And I hope everybody has really enjoyed it. Let's say, if you've got to unmute yourself and shout out loud. And otherwise, I would say, if you've got any questions, particularly on Lely robot farms, the FMS service is there. Whether you're in Devon and Cornwall or anywhere else in the country, you will have a Lely Center somewhere near you, which will have FMS there. And we will all be happy to answer your questions and help you out. Well, that's our office number, and you know, you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram and all the other things you find people on nowadays. So yeah, thank you very much, Mike. It's very useful and very interesting.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for inviting me. Okay, and thank you very much for listening, everyone. Thanks for listening to me too.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was very informative today. A lot to digest for someone who is not in farm management support function. But we are learning. We are learning. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Joanna.
I'm just going to stop the recording now as well.